In these troubled times, when the evening news fills our hearts with worry about what's become of common decency, I want to share a story that might restore your faith in the goodness that still lives in ordinary folks. This happened in a place not unlike the small towns many of us remember, where neighbors knew each other's names and a man's word still meant something. 8-year-old Tommy Clearwater pressed his back against that rusted pickup truck, heart hammering like a woodpecker against old oak. The abandoned gas station reeked of motor oil and years of neglect. Through the cracked windshield, he watched Jake Morrison kick empty beer cans in his direction, each metallic clang echoing like a church bell tolling trouble. "Come out, half-breed." Jake's voice carried the cruel confidence of an 18-year-old who'd never known defeat. Tommy's ankle throbbed something fierce from yesterday's tumble, making escape impossible. Blood dripped from his palm, where broken glass had bitten deep. In the distance, a massive figure emerged from the cornfield like something from an old Western picture show. Earl Henderson, the disgraced sheriff, walking with deadly purpose toward what would change them all forever. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Tommy's fingers traced the compass in his pocket, the only thing his daddy left behind before vanishing into bottles and broken promises. The brass felt warm against his palm, edges worn smooth from countless desperate wishes. 6 months back, everything had been different. Before the divorce papers, before the whispers at Clearwater Elementary about that mixed-blood boy with the drunk daddy, before Jake Morrison's gang started their campaign of daily meanness, the town of Millerville stretched like a healing wound across the Montana prairie. 847 souls and dwindling fast. Boarded storefronts lined Main Street, their hand-painted signs fading like old photographs. The copper mine had closed 3 winters past, taking good-paying jobs and decent folks' hopes with it. Now only the stubborn families remained, clinging to land their granddaddies had claimed with sweat and prayers. Tommy shifted his weight, feeling gravel bite through his dungarees. His ankle sent lightning bolts of pure misery up his leg. Yesterday's lesson from Jake's crew when they caught him scrubbing graffiti off the war memorial. Tommy's granddaddy's name was carved into that stone. Sergeant Michael Clearwater, killed in Korea at 19, fighting for freedom he'd never lived to see. Sarah worked double shifts now, coffee and eggs at Murphy's Diner until 3, then mopping floors at the courthouse until the midnight whistle blew. Tommy often fell asleep to the sound of her old Ford truck engine turning over, praying it wouldn't die before payday. He knew about the overdue rent notices hidden in her pocketbook, the way she divided single cans of Campbell's soup into 2 suppers. Earl Henderson lived in that rusted trailer behind Peterson's feed store, drinking away his pension and his shame. 5 years back, Earl had been Sheriff Henderson, trusted and respected by every decent person in 3 counties. Then came the federal investigation. The bribes. The early retirement that fooled nobody with half a brain. His boy Danny had drowned in Bitter Creek while Earl slept off a whiskey bender on the muddy bank. Jake Morrison's anger burned hotter each passing month like a coal stove in January. His daddy rotted in state prison for assault. His mama worked 3 jobs that barely kept beans on the table. Jake channeled his rage into systematic cruelty, targeting anyone weaker than himself. Mixed-race Tommy represented everything Jake despised about his own confusion, never quite belonging anywhere that mattered. The gas station where Tommy now crouched had once promised prosperity. Highway 94 was supposed to run straight through Millerville, bringing tourists and commerce and hope. Instead, the interstate bypassed them 20 miles south, leaving only this monument to dreams that died hard. Tommy heard Jake's boots crunching closer on broken glass and busted concrete. Through the truck's side mirror, he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold as well water. Jake wasn't walking alone anymore. Tommy's stomach twisted tight as a knot in wet rope when he recognized those voices. Ricky Fastwind's nervous laugh cut through the evening air like a rusty saw blade. Marcus Crow Thompson's heavy footsteps followed Jake's lighter ones, boots scraping against busted concrete like fingernails on a chalkboard. 3 hours earlier, Tommy had crouched behind the library dumpster, fingers digging into rusted metal while Jake's gang planned their devilment. Mrs. Dorothy Wright had been closing the library early, her weathered hand steady as she locked up the only safe haven Tommy knew in this whole town. "Tomorrow night," Jake had said. Smoke from his Lucky Strike drifting over Tommy's hiding spot. "Old Lady Wright thinks she can protect half-breeds in her precious library. Time she learned different." The walk from town to the gas station had taken Tommy the better part of 2 hours on his busted ankle. Each step through the corn rows sent jolts of pure fire up his leg, forcing him to rest against fence posts every few hundred yards. The stalks whispered secrets in the evening breeze, their dried leaves cutting thin lines across his arms like paper cuts. He'd brought his daddy's compass, brass worn smooth as a river stone, glass spider-webbed with cracks that caught the dying light. The needle still pointed north true, though the case wouldn't close proper anymore. Tommy had wrapped it in his last clean handkerchief, hoping Jake might take it as payment for Mrs. Wright's safety. The gas station's interior reeked worse than a chicken coop in August. Rain had seeped through broken windows for years, warping floorboards and spawning dark stains across peeling wallpaper that might once have been yellow. Warning signs hung crooked on rusted chains. Danger. Unstable flooring. Authorized personnel only. Tommy had chosen his hiding spot careful-like. Behind that abandoned truck where he could see anyone approaching from the main road, the vehicle's tires had long since rotted clean away, leaving it squatting on bare rims like a three-legged dog. Now Jake's truck rumbled into the lot, exhaust pipe dragging sparks across broken asphalt. The engine died with a mechanical wheeze that sounded like his granddaddy's last breath. Doors slammed. 1, 2, 3. Tommy pressed his eye to a gap in the truck's window rubber, watching boots circle the building like buzzards. Half-breed. Jake's voice bounced off concrete walls like a ricocheting bullet. "Know you're here somewhere? Saw your tracks in the dirt, plain as day?" Tommy's throat tasted like copper pennies. He eased out from behind that truck, compass clutched tight in his left hand. The setting sun painted everything the color of dried blood, turning shadows into black pools deep enough to drown in. Jake stood 15 feet away, thumbs hooked in his belt loops like some gunslinger from the picture shows. Scar tissue ran from his left ear, clean down to his jawline, souvenir from his daddy's final drunken rage before the law took him away. Ricky flanked him, 16 years old and nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Marcus brought up the rear, thick-shouldered and quiet as Sunday morning. "Didn't figure you had the backbone," Jake said, his voice sharp as breaking glass. Tommy held up the compass, brass catching the last rays of sunlight. "For Mrs. Wright's library? You leave her be." Jake's laugh was uglier than sin. "Library boy. There wasn't going to be no fire. Just wanted to see how far you'd crawl to play hero." The words hit Tommy like a slap across the face. He'd limped 2 miles on a busted ankle, risked everything, for pure deception. "Real plan's better than that," Jake continued, pulling a little Kodak camera from his jacket pocket. "You're going to take this spray paint, walk on over to that war memorial, and write some choice words about your precious granddaddy. Then I'm going to take pictures and show the whole school what mixed-blood loyalty really looks like." Tommy's fingers tightened on the compass until the metal bit into his palm. "No, sir, I won't do it." Sergeant Michael Clearwater. Jake read from a wrinkled paper. Real war hero. Wasn't he wonder what he'd think about his half-breed grandson disrespecting his memory for all eternity? The compass felt slick with sweat in Tommy's grip. He died fighting for this country. For folks like you, too. Folks like me. Jake stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. Your Irish side conquered my people. Your Indian side sold out to the conquerors. You don't belong to nobody. Half-breed. High time you learned that lesson. Ricky shifted uncomfortably, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on God's green earth. Jake, maybe we should just head on back to town and... Shut your fool mouth. Jake's eyes never left Tommy's face. You gonna take that paint and do exactly what I told you? Or do I make Mrs. Wright's life real difficult? Maybe her car gets all scratched up. Maybe her windows get busted. Maybe worse things happen to old ladies who stick their noses where they don't belong? Tommy backed toward the building's entrance, my ankle screaming with each step like a branded calf. I said no. I meant no. Then I reckon we do this the hard way. Jake lunged forward like a striking snake. Tommy spun away, his foot catching on that warning chain. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance like a scarecrow in a tornado. The rotted floorboard gave way with a splintering crack that sounded like gunshot. Cold water rushed up his chest as he plunged through broken wood into darkness. Stagnant pond scum filled his nostrils with the smell of death and decay. Broken glass scraped his ribs raw. He thrashed upward, breaking the surface in that narrow hole, gasping and choking like a landed fish. The walls rose 8 feet above his head, slimy concrete, slick as ice, impossible to climb. Water reached his shoulders, tasting of rust and things long dead. Sweet Jesus, Ricky whispered, his voice high and tight as piano wire. Jake stared down at Tommy, his scarred face pale as moonlight in the dying day. Boy, you hurt bad down there. Tommy tried to find solid footing on the slick bottom, but his ankle buckled like wet cardboard under his weight. The water was deeper than he'd reckoned, much deeper. Thunder rolled across the prairie like distant cannon fire, and Tommy felt the first fat raindrops hit his upturned face like tears from heaven. The water was already starting to rise. Earl Henderson's boots squelched through mud between corn rows, the sound lost beneath thunder, rumbling across the Montana prairie. Sarah Clearwater's desperate cries had pulled him from his trailer porch, where he'd been nursing his 4th Budweiser and watching storm clouds gather like Judgment Day. Now he stood at the edge of that gas station lot, taking in the scene like a lawman arriving too late to prevent a tragedy. Tommy Clearwater floated in that hole like a broken toy, water lapping at his chin with each small wave. 3 young fellows clustered around the opening, 2 backing away from trouble, 1 frozen in place like a deer in headlights. Earl's hand moved by instinct to his hip, fingers finding empty leather where his service weapon used to rest. Get away from that boy! Earl's voice carried the authority of 30 years wearing a badge. Though his had been stripped away 5 years past, Jake Morrison spun toward the sound, fists clenched tight as vice grips. Recognition dawned across his scarred face like sunrise over broken glass. Earl Henderson, the dirty lawman. Earl stepped into the dying light, gravel crunching beneath his steel-toed work boots. That child's in real trouble down there. Your trouble's with me, Jake snarled, his voice cracking like a bullwhip. You remember William Morrison? My daddy rotting in state prison because of your one honest arrest. The bitter irony tasted like old coffee grounds in Earl's mouth. Jake's father had been pushing methamphetamine to high school children, and Earl's bust had been one of his few clean collars in those final corrupt years. Now the son blamed him for finally doing his sworn duty. "Water's rising fast," Ricky Fastwind said, his voice high and tight as banjo strings. "Boy can't get himself out." Tommy's lips had turned blue as winter sky. His small fingers scrabbled against slick concrete, finding no purchase on walls slippery as ice. Each breath came shorter than the last, like a bellows running out of air. Earl sized up the hole's dimensions, the unstable flooring around its edges, the growing puddle fed by underground springs activated by recent rains. "How long's he been down there, Ben? 10 minutes, maybe 15? Marcus Thompson's bulk shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Wasn't supposed to happen like this, I swear." "Shut your mouth," Jake snapped like a steel trap. "This ain't our concern anymore." Rain began in earnest now, fat drops drumming against rusted metal roofing like buckshot. Each drop that hit the hole's surface sent ripples across water already touching Tommy's neck like cold fingers. "Boy's gonna drown sure as sunrise," Earl said. "That what you want weighing on your conscience?" "Don't preach to me about conscience, Henderson." Jake's voice cracked like a whip. "You took bribes while children overdosed on drugs you let pass through. My daddy may be garbage, but at least he never pretended to be something decent." The words hit Earl in the gut, doubling him over with shame that never fully healed like an old bullet wound. Danny's face flashed through his mind. 8 years old, blue around the lips, pulled from Bitter Creek too late because Earl had been passed out drunk when he should have been watching his son. Sarah Clearwater burst from the cornrows like a woman possessed by demons. Her diner uniform was torn to pieces, hair wild with burrs and sweat. She saw Tommy in that water and screamed, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than lungs, deeper than heart. "My baby." She lunged toward the hole like a lioness protecting her cub. Earl caught her arm, his grip firm but gentle as he could manage. "Ma'am, hold on now. Floor's not stable. We go in wrong. And we'll have 2 folks trapped down there." Sarah tried to wrench free, her fingernails digging into Earl's weathered hands like cat claws. "Let me go. That's my boy." "I know it is. Lord knows I understand." Earl's voice dropped to the tone he'd used with victims' families, back when he still remembered how to comfort rather than corrupt. "But we do this smart and careful, or we lose him for certain." Tommy's chin dipped below the surface. He came up sputtering, coughing contaminated water that tasted of rust and death. His movements were getting sluggish, like an old man in winter. "Mama." Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, carried on evening air. "I tried to help Mrs. Wright like you taught me." Sarah dropped to her knees at the hole's edge, reaching down though her fingers fell 3 feet short of her son. "I'm right here, baby. Mama's right here." Rain drummed harder against the roof, a metallic symphony of desperation. The water level rose an inch, then 2, like a bathtub filling with liquid doom. "We need rope," Earl said, scanning the abandoned building with a lawman's eye. "Something strong to pull him up with." "Why should we trust you one lick?" Jake demanded. "You're a criminal, a drunk, a failure at everything that matters." Earl met the young man's eyes without flinching, like facing down a rattlesnake on a country road. "Because right now, I'm all that boy's got between living and dying. And maybe that's enough." Headlights swept across the lot like searchlights as a patrol car pulled in fast, red and blue lights painting the scene in alternating colors. Deputy Mills climbed out, hand resting on his service weapon, taking in the chaos with rookie nervousness. "What's the situation here, folks?" Mills called out. "Child trapped in flooded hole," Earl replied, falling back into procedural language like an old uniform that still fit. "Need immediate rescue assistance?" Mills recognized Earl's voice, and his expression hardened like concrete setting. "Henderson, what in blazes are you doing here? Trying to save a life while there's still time? You don't have authority here anymore. Step back and let me handle this proper." Tommy's head went under again. This time it took him longer to surface. And when he did, his eyes had trouble focusing like he was looking through fog. Sarah screamed again, a sound that cut through rain and thunder like a blade through silk. "Do something, please, in the name of all that's holy." Earl looked at that hole, at Mills fumbling with his radio, at Jake standing paralyzed between hatred and growing horror. The water was rising faster now, fed by the storm above and underground springs below like nature's own execution. "Mills, you call for emergency services yet." "Ambulance is 20 minutes out. Fire department's dealing with flooding on Highway 2. 20 minutes. Tommy didn't have 20 minutes to spare. Earl pulled off his jacket and boots, ignoring the shocked stares. "I'm going down there. Henderson, stand down." "That's a direct order. You're not my supervisor anymore. Mills?" Earl tested the edge of the hole with his toe. The concrete was slick as ice, but it held his weight. "And that boy's dying while we argue about who's in charge." Jake grabbed Earl's arm with surprising strength. "You go in there, old man. You'll drown too." "Then what's accomplished?" Earl looked down at Jake's hand, calloused from farm work, scarred from too many fights, but still young enough to believe the world made sense. "Maybe that's what I deserve for all my failures. But maybe it's also what I need to do to make things right." Lightning cracked overhead like God's own whip, and the lights of another vehicle swept across the lot. But this wasn't official business. This was someone else entirely, someone none of them had expected. Through the rain and gathering darkness, Mrs. Dorothy Wright's ancient pickup truck pulled to a stop, headlights cutting through the storm like hope itself, and climbing out of the passenger seat, moving with the careful deliberation of a man carrying heavy secrets, was someone who made Earl's blood run cold as creek water in January. Tommy's father had come home. Tommy's body bobbed face down in that murky water like a discarded doll. Sarah's scream shattered the night like church glass hitting concrete. Earl Henderson didn't think twice. He dove straight down into hell. The shock of cold water drove needles into his lungs like someone had shot him full of ice picks. His arthritic joints seized up tight as rusted hinges. He plunged 8 feet through contaminated liquid that tasted of rust and decay and things better left buried. His fingers found Tommy's shirt collar, yanked the boy's head above surface. Tommy's lips were purple as ripe plums, eyes rolled back white as fresh snow. No breathing to speak of. "Get me something to stand on," Earl shouted, treading water while supporting the unconscious child. His waterlogged work boots dragged like boat anchors. Right now, Deputy Mills finally moved his backside, running toward his patrol car like the devil was chasing him. Jake Morrison stood frozen solid, staring down at the man he'd hated and the boy he'd tormented. "Jake." Sarah's voice cut through his paralysis like a hot knife through butter. "Help them, for the love of mercy." Earl tilted Tommy's head back, felt for breath against his cheek like checking for wind. Nothing but stillness. He positioned his mouth over the boy's blue lips, forced air into tiny lungs that felt fragile as bird bones. Tommy's chest rose once, twice. Earl felt ribs like matchsticks beneath his palm. "Come on, son," Earl whispered between breaths. "Come on back to us." Jake stripped off his denim jacket, lowered it into the hole like a lifeline. "Grab hold of this." Earl wrapped one arm around Tommy's chest, caught the jacket sleeve with his free hand. Jake hauled with everything the good Lord gave him, muscles straining against dead weight and desperation. Earl's shoulder separated with a wet pop that sent fire down his arm like lightning striking. They broke the surface together. Earl, Tommy, and 30 pounds of contaminated water that poured from the boy's clothes like a waterfall of misery. Earl's boots found purchase on submerged concrete blocks that shifted under his weight. He held Tommy against his chest, continuing rescue breathing while Jake anchored them both. Sarah reached down, her nurse's training cutting through maternal panic like a sharp blade. She pressed 2 fingers to Tommy's neck, searching for the flutter of life. Heartbeats there, weak as a newborn kitten, but steady. Tommy coughed hard, spewing black water across Earl's shirt like tobacco juice. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy as creek pebbles. "Mama? Right here? Baby?" Sarah's voice cracked like dry kindling. "Right here where I belong." Mills returned with a tow strap from his cruiser, the kind used for pulling vehicles out of ditches. "Ambulance is still 15 minutes out. We need to get them up before this whole place collapses." The concrete blocks under Earl's feet shifted dangerous-like, threatening to tumble into deeper water. Each movement sent more debris falling like hail. Tommy shivered violently against Earl's chest, body temperature dropping faster than a stone down a well. "Sarah," Earl called up, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I'm gonna lift him up. You pull with everything you've got." Sarah wrapped that tow strap around her waist like a belt, braced her feet against the hole's edge. Her muscles coiled tight as piano wire. "Ready when you are." Earl positioned his hands under Tommy's arms, fighting the boy's dead weight and his own failing strength. The water had risen another 6 inches, now touching Earl's chin when he stood straight as a fence post. 1, 2, 3. Earl lifted with everything left in his old bones. Sarah pulled till her face turned red as August tomatoes. Tommy rose 3 feet before the strap slipped through Sarah's wet hands like a greased rope. The boy plunged back into that water, going under completely. Earl dove after him, lungs burning from the cold like he'd swallowed fire. His fingers swept the muddy bottom until they found wet fabric. He dragged Tommy to the surface, both of them gasping like landed fish. "I'm coming down," Sarah announced, already swinging her legs over the edge. "No, ma'am," Earl protested. "Too dangerous by half." Sarah dropped into that hole anyway, diner uniform billowing around her like angel wings as she hit the water. The impact drove her under. She surfaced choking and sputtering, but immediately moved to Tommy's other side. "Together," she said, teeth chattering like castanets. "We lift him together or not at all." More headlights swept the lot, bright as sunrise. Mrs. Dorothy Wright's ancient pickup rattled to a stop like an old horse reaching the barn, followed by Dr. Martinez's battered sedan that wheezed worse than a chain smoker. The elderly librarian climbed out carrying thermoses and blankets, while the doctor grabbed a medical bag that had seen better decades. "What do you folks need?" Dr. Martinez called down into their watery prison. "Hypothermia treatment," Sarah replied through blue lips, "and a better way to get us out than prayer alone." Jake had been quiet as Sunday morning, staring into the hole where 2 adults now supported 1 dying child. His voice came out strangled like he was being choked. "This is all my doing." "Shut your fool mouth and help," Earl snapped, though not unkindly. Jake looked around wild-eyed, then ran toward the gas station's collapsed roof like a man possessed. He returned dragging a sheet of corrugated metal, long enough to span the hole's width. "Mills, help me with this contraption." They positioned the metal sheet as a bridge. It sagged under its own weight like an old man's back, but held firm. Dr. Martinez crawled across careful-like, medical bag clutched between his teeth like a retriever with a duck. "Get the boy up first," Dr. Martinez instructed, lowering a proper rescue harness he'd brought from his clinic. Hypothermia's setting in fast as winter. Tommy's shivering had stopped completely, a bad sign that made Earl's heart skip beats. His skin felt waxy under Earl's fingers like a candle left too long in the sun. Sarah worked the harness around her son's chest while Earl supported his weight. "Tommy, honey, can you hear your mama?" Sarah's voice stayed steady through pure willpower. Tommy's eyes found her face through the gathering darkness. Did I do good, Mama?" "You did perfect, baby. Just perfect as a summer morning." Dr. Martinez and Jake hauled on that rope while Sarah and Earl guided Tommy up through the narrow opening. The boy's body scraped against concrete, leaving streaks of blood on the walls like war paint. Once Tommy was up, wrapped tight in Mrs. Wright's quilted blankets, the doctor began immediate treatment. "Core temperatures dropped too low for comfort. We need to warm him gradual-like." Mrs. Wright had positioned herself as a windbreak, shielding Tommy from the rain while Dr. Martinez worked over him like a man possessed. "Ambulance coming soon." 7 minutes, Mills reported, checking his watch. Sarah was next up, blue-lipped and shaking, but focused entirely on her son like a mother cat with her kitten. Earl remained in that hole, too exhausted to climb out under his own power. The water had risen to his shoulders. "Henderson," Jake called down, "grab that rope." "Can't feel my hands proper," Earl admitted. The cold had numbed his extremities worse than winter frost. His separated shoulders screamed with each movement like a branded calf. Jake looked at Ricky and Marcus, who had been standing useless as scarecrows throughout the whole rescue. "Get down there. Help him up." "I ain't going in that water for nobody," Marcus protested. Jake's fist connected with Marcus's jaw, dropping him into the mud like a sack of grain. "Then you're worthless as teats on a boar hog." Ricky, shamed by Jake's anger, lowered himself into that hole. Together, he and Jake managed to extract Earl, who collapsed on solid ground like a landed whale. Dr. Martinez split his attention between Tommy and Earl, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Both need immediate hospital transport. Hypothermia. Possible pneumonia. Shock setting in fast." Tommy's breathing had steadied some, but he remained unconscious as death. Sarah held his hand, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. Earl lay on his back, staring up at storm clouds that still threatened more rain. Ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer like salvation itself. Jake knelt beside Earl, rain streaming down his scarred face like tears. "Why'd you do it?" "After everything I said about you," Earl's voice came out as a croak. "Because he reminded me of my boy Danny. And because somebody had to." "Your boy, Danny, 8 years old, when he drowned in Bitter Creek." Earl's eyes stayed fixed on the sky. "I was supposed to be watching him. Instead, I was drunk as a lord. Sound familiar to you?" Jake's hands trembled, not from cold, but from recognition, hitting him like lightning. His own daddy, drunk and violent, his own childhood, spent afraid and angry at the whole world. "I've been just like him," Jake whispered. "Just like my old man in every way that matters." The ambulance rounded the corner, emergency lights painting everything red and blue like the 4th of July. Paramedics jumped out, taking over from Dr. Martinez with professional efficiency that came from years of practice. As they loaded Tommy onto a stretcher, the boy's eyes opened one more time. His gaze found Earl, who was being helped onto a second gurney by gentle hands. "Thank you," Tommy mouthed, too weak to speak aloud. Earl nodded, then closed his eyes as the paramedics inserted an IV into his arm, like threading a needle. Sarah climbed into the ambulance with Tommy, never releasing his hand for even a second. As the doors slammed shut, she looked back at the scene. Jake kneeling in the mud. Earl being loaded into a second ambulance. Mrs. Wright and Dr. Martinez cleaning up the aftermath of a rescue that had nearly become a funeral. The ambulance pulled away. Sirens wailing into the night. Jake stood alone in the rain, watching those lights disappear into darkness like stars going out. Behind him, Deputy Mills approached with handcuffs that caught the light. "Jake Morrison," Mills said formally. "You're under arrest for assault and child endangerment." Jake held out his hands without resistance, his voice barely audible above the rain. "I know it. I've known it all along." As the cuffs clicked shut with finality, Jake looked one last time at the hole that had almost become a grave. Tomorrow, there would be lawyers and judges and consequences he couldn't escape or charm his way out of. Tonight, though, he'd helped save the boy he'd tried to destroy. And for the first time in his miserable life, that felt like something worth whatever price he'd have to pay in blood and years. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from broken concrete and filling the hole with fresh water that would freeze solid before morning came to claim the land. The fluorescent lights of Billings County Hospital hummed like angry wasps trapped in mason jars. Tommy Clearwater lay motionless on that gurney, his skin the color of old parchment left too long in the sun. Machines beeped in mechanical rhythm while Dr. Sandra Martinez checked his core temperature for the third time in 10 minutes. 89 degrees, she muttered under her breath, adjusting the warming blankets like a mother tucking in her child. Still dropping like a stone down a well? Sarah pressed her palm flat against the observation window, watching nurses insert another IV line into her son's thin arm. His chest rose and fell with artificial regularity. That ventilator doing work his hypothermic body couldn't manage on its own. The steady whoosh click of the machine counted seconds like a grandfather clock marking time toward judgment. Mrs. Clearwater. The voice belonged to Patricia Knox, a social worker whose clipboard carried more authority than Sarah's maternal desperation. "We need to discuss Tommy's care arrangement right away. He's unconscious. What's there to discuss?" Knox's pen clicked against that metal clipboard like a woodpecker working dead bark. "Your son was found in a dangerous situation at 8 o'clock in the evening. Where were you at that time? Working? At Murphy's Diner until 3? Then cleaning the courthouse until midnight?" Sarah's voice carried the bone-deep exhaustion of 16-hour days. "Same as I do every blessed day to keep food on our table." Unsupervised minor, engaging with known criminal elements. Knox scribbled notes without looking up from her paperwork. "This follows a pattern of inadequate supervision, I'm afraid." Through that thick glass, Tommy's body convulsed like a fish thrown on dry land. The heart monitor's steady beeping accelerated into a frantic alarm that cut through hospital air like a fire bell. Dr. Martinez and 2 nurses rushed into the room, pushing Sarah aside like furniture. "He's having seizures," Martinez called out sharp and clear. "Get me 5 milligrams of Valium, and make it quick." Sarah's hands flattened against that window, watching her son's back arch off the bed like a drawn bow. His eyes had rolled back, showing only white like hard-boiled eggs. Foam bubbled from his blue lips, thick as soap suds. "Contaminated water?" Martinez explained to the nurses while working over Tommy. "Could be bacterial infection. Could be toxic reaction. Start broad-spectrum antibiotics and pray they work." The seizure lasted 47 seconds of pure hell. Sarah counted each one, her breath fogging the glass, like winter breath on a car window. When Tommy's body finally relaxed, the monitor showed his heart rate dropping to dangerous levels. "Mrs. Clearwater?" A different voice now. "Robert Clearwater? Tommy's uncle from the Crow Reservation?" Sarah's ex-brother-in-law wore his tribal council authority like Sunday clothes. "We need to have ourselves a serious talk." "Not now, Robert. Right now." Robert's hand touched her shoulder. Firm, but not cruel. That boy's fighting for his life because he was wandering around alone after dark like a stray dog. Where I come from, we don't let our children run wild. Sarah turned, her nurse's training warring with maternal rage like oil and water. Where you come from? Robert, you mean the place that kicked me out for marrying your brother? The place that wouldn't lift a finger when Michael started drinking himself to death. That where you come from? Michael made his choices. You made yours. Tommy shouldn't pay the price for both. In the next wing over, Earl Henderson lay connected to his own collection of machines that beeped and hummed like electronic crickets. The cardiac unit's monitors showed irregular rhythms that made the attending physician frown like a banker reading bad loan papers. Earl's separated shoulder had been reset and stabilized, but that hypothermia had stressed his already damaged ticker beyond repair. Margaret Henderson sat in the visitor's chair, her hands folded in her lap like a woman waiting for the preacher's sermon. She'd driven 3 hours from Bozeman after Deputy Mills tracked down her telephone number. 32 years of marriage, she said to Earl's unconscious form. And you finally do something I can be proud of. Earl's eyes fluttered open, pupils dilated from medication like black pools. Maggie, that really you? Don't try to talk. Doctor says your heart's working too hard as it is. Earl's voice came out as a whisper dry as autumn leaves. Danny, is Danny here? Danny's gone. Earl has been for 5 long years. Margaret's tone stayed steady, practiced from years of delivering hard truths. But that little boy you saved tonight? He gets to grow up and become a man. Did I do right this time? Margaret reached over, took his weathered hand in both of hers. For the first time in a long while. Yes. Down the hall, Jake Morrison sat shackled to a hospital bed like a dangerous animal. A deputy posted outside his door like a guard at the county jail. His shoulder injury from the rescue had required surgery, torn ligaments and a hairline fracture that would ache on rainy days for the rest of his natural life. The painkillers made everything fuzzy around the edges, but couldn't numb the weight of what he'd done. Angela Foster, his public defender, sat in that plastic chair reviewing files with the enthusiasm of a woman heading to her own hanging. She'd handled dozens of cases like this, angry young men from broken homes, making choices that destroyed everything they touched like tornadoes through wheat fields. Assault charges, child endangerment, criminal trespassing. Foster read from her legal pad. District attorney wants to try you as an adult. You could be looking at 5 to 8 years in state prison? Jake stared at the ceiling tiles, counting water stains like constellations in a dirty sky. What about the boy? Still critical. If he dies? Foster didn't finish that sentence. The words hit Jake like physical blows from a sledgehammer. He'd watched Tommy Clearwater nearly drown in contaminated water, had seen the boy's lips turn purple and his eyes roll back white as winter snow. Tommy, who'd tried to protect Mrs. Wright, who'd offered his daddy's compass as payment for peace. I want to confess everything, Jake said. I'd strongly advise against that until we know the boy's condition. No, ma'am. Jake turned his head, meeting Foster's eyes directly. I want to confess to everything. All of it. The bullying, the vandalism, everything my gang did to innocent folks, names, dates, all of it. Foster's pen stopped moving like a broken clock. That would implicate other juveniles, destroy your plea bargaining position completely. Good. Maybe it's about time. In the hospital's main lobby, Jennifer Walsh adjusted her microphone while the cameraman checked lighting levels like a Broadway stage manager. The regional news reporter had arrived 2 hours ago, drawn by police scanner chatter about a racial incident and child endangerment in rural community. This is Jennifer Walsh reporting live from Billings County Hospital, where an 8-year-old boy fights for his life after what appears to be a violent confrontation with Native American gang members. Mrs. Dorothy Wright watched the broadcast from the waiting area, her weathered hands gripping a coffee cup grown cold as creek water hours ago. The reporter's words bore no resemblance to the rescue she'd witnessed with her own 2 eyes. "Excuse me, miss," Wright interrupted, approaching Walsh's camera setup. "That's not what happened out there." Walsh smiled with professional dismissal. "Ma'am, we're broadcasting live. If you could please step aside." "That boy tried to protect my library from vandals. Those gang members helped save his life. And Earl Henderson risked everything to pull him out of that water." The cameraman kept rolling. Walsh's smile tightened like a noose. "Are you saying the official police reports are incorrect?" "I'm saying you weren't there to see what really happened." Father McManus entered through the hospital's main doors, his collar slightly askew from the rushed drive from Clearwater. Behind him came Chief Robert Crow Dog, moving with the deliberate pace of a man accustomed to measuring his words carefully. "Mrs. Wright," Father McManus called out, interrupting the news interview. "How's our boy doing?" "Critical condition. Hypothermia and possible infection from that contaminated water." Chief Crow Dog nodded to Wright with respectful acknowledgement. Despite decades of tension between the reservation and town folks, Wright had always treated Native children with dignity in her library. The young man who helped with the rescue, Jake Morrison. "He's tribal blood." "Isn't he, Bob, part tribal?" Wright confirmed. "His grandmother was full-blooded Crow." Walsh sensed a story angle shifting like wind changing direction. "Sir, are you suggesting this was some kind of internal tribal dispute?" Chief Crow Dog's expression remained neutral as granite, but his voice carried quiet authority. "I'm suggesting you might want to understand what happened before you decide what it means for your television audience." Sarah returned to Tommy's room to find Dr. Martinez adjusting medication levels with the precision of a watchmaker. Her son's color had improved slightly, but he remained unconscious as the dead. "How long until we know something definite?" Sarah asked. "Next 6 hours are critical. Core temperatures rising, but slowly as molasses in January. The infection." Martinez hesitated. "We're running cultures on the water samples. Could be bacterial, could be parasitic. Won't know treatment effectiveness until morning." Tommy's eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings. For a moment, Sarah thought he might wake up. Instead, his lips moved soundlessly, forming words no one could hear. "He's dreaming," Martinez observed. Sarah leaned closer to her son's face, trying to read his lips. The words looked familiar, like something she'd heard before in prayers or whispered bedtime stories. "Grandfather," she whispered. "He's talking to his grandfather." Tommy's hand moved under that blanket, fingers tracing patterns Sarah recognized, the motions he made when reading his daddy's old compass. Outside Tommy's room, Robert Clearwater finished his telephone conversation with tribal council members. Social worker Knox waited nearby, her clipboard heavy with court documents that could change everything. "Mrs. Clearwater," Knox announced as Sarah emerged from Tommy's room, "I have an emergency custody order signed by Judge Morrison. Effective immediately, Tommy will be placed in the care of his uncle, pending a full investigation." Sarah's legs nearly gave out like rotted fence posts. "You can't take him now, he's unconscious." "The order takes effect upon his recovery." Robert stepped forward, his face grim as winter. "Sarah, this doesn't have to be permanent. But the boy needs stability, a safe environment. He has that. With me. Really? Then how did he end up half drowned in an abandoned gas station? The question hung in that sterile hospital air like an accusation from heaven itself. Sarah had no answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Down the hall. Alarms began sounding in Earl's room like air raid sirens. His heart monitor showed dangerous arrhythmia. Medical staff rushed past, leaving Sarah standing alone with her brother-in-law and the social worker who held her son's future in a manila folder. Through the chaos of medical emergency, one sound cut through everything else. Jennifer Walsh's voice echoing from the lobby television, describing the night's events to a watching world that would judge them all based on 30 seconds of carefully edited footage. Tommy's lips moved again, still unconscious, still dreaming. This time, Sarah could read the words clearly. Did I do good? The question would haunt her through the longest night of her life, as machines kept her son alive and lawyers decided whether she deserved to keep him. And somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of approaching sirens that could only mean more trouble was heading their way. At 3:17 in the morning, Tommy's kidneys quit working like a broken water pump. Dr. Martinez stood in that harsh fluorescent light, studying lab results that made her stomach turn sour as curdled milk. Creatinine levels are through the roof like a house on fire. The contaminated water? There's bacterial infection, parasites, and something else we can't identify. Sarah pressed her face against that observation window, watching her son's body swell up as toxins built in his bloodstream like poison in a well. His face had puffed beyond recognition, eyelids so swollen they looked like raw beef. We need to start dialysis, Martinez continued. But at his size, his age, she didn't finish that sentence. But Sarah understood clear enough. Behind Sarah, Robert Clearwater signed custody papers with swift, decisive strokes like a banker foreclosing on a farm. Social worker Knox witnessed each signature, her clipboard now heavy with legal authority that would survive even if Tommy didn't. Mrs. Clearwater, Knox announced, her voice carrying the weight of bureaucratic finality. You have supervised visitation rights only. 2 hours daily, pending full investigation. Sarah's legs buckled like wet cardboard. She caught herself against that window, leaving handprints on glass that separated her from her dying son. Please, he needs his mama. He needs proper care, Robert said, his voice cold as January wind. Care you obviously can't provide worth a darn. The words hit Sarah like sledgehammer blows. Every double shift, every sacrifice, every night she'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table after 16 hours of backbreaking work, all of it meaningless now. She was the mother who'd failed to protect her child, plain and simple. Down the hall, Earl Henderson lay in restraints after his second heart attack. The massive coronary had left him brain-damaged and barely conscious, drooling like a baby. Margaret sat beside his bed, divorce papers spread across her lap like a funeral program. 32 years, she whispered to his unresponsive form, and this is how it ends. You trying to be a hero when it's too late to matter one lick? Earl's eyes opened, unfocused and empty as abandoned wells. Saliva pooled at the corner of his mouth. When he tried to speak, only garbled sounds emerged like an animal in pain. The man who'd commanded respect for 3 decades as sheriff now couldn't control his own bodily functions. Margaret stood, smoothing down her skirt. The insurance won't cover this. Brain damage means long-term care facility. I won't bankrupt myself for your guilty conscience. She left those papers on the bedside table and walked away without looking back, her heels clicking on linoleum like nails in a coffin. 3 floors down, Jake Morrison had tried to hang himself with bed sheets in the hospital bathroom. Deputy Collins found him after 20 minutes, long enough to cause brain damage. Not long enough to finish the job proper. The suicide attempt failed, leaving Jake with a feeding tube and the kind of neurological damage that would require lifelong care. His mother, Linda, arrived from the reservation, took one look at her vegetative son, and began screaming like a banshee. "You stupid, stupid boy! You've destroyed us all." Jake could hear her words, could understand them, but couldn't respond worth a darn. The rope had damaged his voice box permanently. He would spend the rest of his natural life silent, trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed his commands, like a prisoner in his own flesh. Outside, Jennifer Walsh's news van had been joined by 3 others. The story was spreading beyond regional coverage. "Racial violence rocks rural Montana" would be the morning headline in newspapers across the country. Mrs. Dorothy Wright sat in her library, surrounded by broken glass from windows smashed during the night. Graffiti covered the walls. "Half-breed lover," and worse things she couldn't bring herself to read completely. Her telephone rang constantly with threats from people who'd seen the news coverage. The town council had already voted to defund the library completely. At 75 years old, Wright faced homelessness and poverty because she'd defended a child. At 4:33 a.m., Tommy coded again. This time, the resuscitation team worked for 12 minutes before achieving a stable heartbeat. Dr. Martinez emerged from that room, surgical scrubs soaked with sweat like she'd been working in a cotton field. "We've done everything we can," she told Sarah. "The next hour will determine." She left the sentence hanging, but Sarah understood clear as daylight. Her son was dying, and she was no longer legally allowed to stay with him through his final moments. Robert Clearwater waited with 2 tribal police officers to escort Sarah from the building, like a common criminal. "The boy needs peace now, not hysteria." Sarah collapsed to her knees in that hospital corridor, her diner uniform stained with vomit from stress and exhaustion. Nurses stepped around her like she was debris from an accident, refusing to meet her eyes. "Please," she whispered to Robert's polished boots. "I'll do anything. Give up custody completely. Just let me stay until..." "Until what?" "Until he dies because of your negligence." Robert's voice carried no warmth, only judgment cold as winter stone. "You had your chance to be a mother. You failed." The tribal police officers lifted Sarah under her arms, carrying her toward the elevator as she sobbed without dignity or restraint. Hospital staff watched with the uncomfortable fascination people reserve for public breakdowns. In the parking lot, Sarah's car had been repossessed. Her apartment keys no longer worked, evicted for associating with criminal elements. She owned nothing but the clothes on her back and a nurse's certification that would be worthless after tonight's publicity. Rain had started again, turning the hospital parking lot into a maze of puddles that reflected neon signs like broken promises. Sarah walked aimlessly through the downpour, her hair plastered to her skull like wet fur. Makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks, she found herself behind a dumpster, vomiting bile and despair onto concrete that reeked of medical waste and rotting food. Her body shook with hypothermia that matched her son's, a parallel suffering that went unnoticed and uncared for. At dawn, Earl Henderson opened his eyes long enough to see those divorce papers. His damaged brain couldn't process the legal language, but he understood the abandonment clear enough. Margaret was gone. His pension was gone. His dignity was gone like smoke and wind. Nurses discussed his case in whispers. They thought he couldn't hear vegetative state, nursing home, welfare case, no family support. Earl tried to move his hand toward the window where morning light filtered through dusty glass. The effort triggered another small stroke that left his face twisted in permanent asymmetry like a broken marionette. Jake Morrison lay in his own waste, unable to call for help, unable to clean himself, unable to escape the prison his body had become. His gang members had been arrested, Ricky and Marcus facing adult charges, as accessories to attempted murder. The reservation had disowned the Morrison family entirely. Linda lost her job, her housing, her tribal benefits. She sat beside Jake's bed, drinking from a bottle she'd smuggled in, cursing the day she'd given birth to him. Tommy's heart monitor showed increasingly erratic patterns. His swollen body fought against machines that breathed for him, pumped his blood, filtered his toxins. Dr. Martinez had stopped checking on him every few minutes. There was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable. Sarah huddled behind that dumpster as the sun rose, watching hospital staff arrive for the morning shift. Clean, purposeful people with homes and families and children who would survive to see another day. She'd become one of the invisible homeless, the people she'd passed without seeing during her years of financial struggle. Now she understood their desperation, their willingness to beg for coins, their acceptance of society's disgust. A security guard found her at 6:15 a.m., shivering in her own filth, mumbling prayers to a God who seemed to have stopped listening years ago. "Move along," he said, not unkindly. "Can't have vagrants on hospital property." Sarah stood on unsteady legs, her uniform stained beyond recognition, her dignity stripped away by cascading failures that started with her son's disappearance and ended with his dying in a room she was forbidden to enter. She walked toward the street, having nowhere to go and no one who would take her in. Behind her, machines kept Tommy alive while lawyers decided whether his death would be ruled accidental or homicide. Earl Henderson stared at the ceiling through eyes that could no longer focus properly, listening to whispered discussions about pulling the plug and quality of life decisions. Jake Morrison tried to scream but produced only rasping sounds that brought no nurses, no comfort, no relief from the hell his choices had created. 3 broken souls, destroyed by one night's attempt to do good in a world that punished kindness and rewarded only survival of the fittest. As Sarah reached the hospital's front entrance, her legs finally gave out completely. She fell face first onto wet concrete, tasting blood and rainwater, and the bitter truth that she'd lost everything that had ever mattered. Behind her, through windows she could no longer see, machines suddenly began screaming alarms in Tommy's room. But this time, the sound was different. This time, something impossible was happening. Tommy's heart stopped beating at 6:47 a.m. sharp. The flatline scream of machines filled the pediatric ward as Dr. Martinez and her team rushed into that room like firefighters answering an alarm. Sarah collapsed outside on wet concrete, heard nothing through those thick hospital walls. But something impossible happened in the 43 seconds of clinical death. Tommy's brain, starved of oxygen yet somehow still functioning, began healing damage that had accumulated over months of bullying and fear. Old injuries mended themselves. Scar tissue from his childhood polio dissolved like morning frost in sunlight. When his heart restarted, without shock treatments, without drugs, simply beginning to beat again like a clock wound by invisible hands, Tommy Clearwater opened eyes that held a clarity Dr. Martinez had never seen in any child. "Where's Earl?" Tommy's voice came out strong, clear as a mountain stream. "Where's Jake? Are they all right?" Dr. Martinez checked his pupils, his reflexes, his coordination with trembling fingers. Everything tested normal, better than normal. "Tommy, how do you feel? Son, my leg doesn't hurt anymore." Tommy sat up without assistance, moving with fluid grace that seemed impossible after near drowning. "I need to see them both. Earl and Jake. Please, ma'am." 3 floors up, Earl Henderson lay dying from his second massive heart attack when something stirred in the deepest part of his consciousness, not a vision. He'd given up believing in miracles years back, but a memory so clear it felt like present reality. Danny. age 6, sitting on Earl's lap while Earl taught him to read compass directions. North isn't just a direction, Daddy. It's where good folks point when they're lost and need finding. Earl's damaged heart suddenly steadied like a compass needle finding true magnetic north. The arrhythmia that had killed him twice smoothed into strong, regular beats. His eyes opened, focused, aware as they hadn't been since the stroke. Margaret. His voice carried none of the brain damage doctors had predicted. But Margaret was gone. Those divorce papers lay scattered where she'd dropped them. Worthless now because Earl Henderson no longer wanted what he'd lost. He wanted what he'd found. The ability to choose right action over self-preservation. Earl pulled out his IV lines. Ignored nurses' protests like gnats buzzing around his ears, and walked toward the elevator on legs that shouldn't have supported him. His separated shoulder had healed crooked, leaving one arm shorter than the other, but he moved with purpose that transcended physical limitation. In the psychiatric wing, Jake Morrison lay motionless after his failed suicide attempt. Feeding tube snaking down his throat like a mechanical snake. Brain supposedly damaged beyond all repair. His mother, Linda, had drunk herself unconscious in the bedside chair, mumbling curses between snores that shook the windows. Jake's eyes opened. Not the vacant stare doctors expected, but full consciousness sharp as winter air. He reached up, carefully removed that feeding tube himself, and sat up despite restraints that should have prevented any movement. The rope damage to his throat was real. He would never speak clearly again like he used to. But his mind functioned with startling clarity, as if the brush with death had burned away everything false and left only essential truth. He'd tried to destroy Tommy Clearwater out of self-hatred, pure and simple. The boy had nearly died because of it. Jake's suicide attempt hadn't been cowardice. It had been recognition that some sins demanded payment in blood. But lying in that hospital bed, Jake understood something his anger had hidden from him. Tommy's mixed heritage wasn't weakness or confusion. It was strength. The ability to bridge worlds that others saw as separate and hostile. Jake stood. His movements awkward, but determined as a newborn colt. He needed to find Tommy. To make amends before legal consequences separated them forever and always. Outside, Sarah pulled herself from that concrete like a woman rising from her own grave, rainwater mixing with tears that had nothing left behind them, her clothes hung in tatters, her dignity destroyed, her son dying beyond her reach. But as she knelt in hospital parking lot mud, something shifted in her chest. Not hope. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Something harder and more valuable: acceptance of her own worth regardless of external judgment. She'd worked 2 jobs to feed her son. She'd sacrificed everything for his well-being. She'd raised a boy brave enough to risk his life protecting others. The social workers and custody hearings and court orders couldn't change those facts or erase that truth. Sarah stood, mud falling from her ruined uniform, like sins being washed away, and walked back into that hospital. Security guards moved to stop her. She was banned from the premises. But something in her bearing, some quality of maternal authority that transcended legal documents, made them step aside. She took the elevator to the pediatric floor, where alarms had stopped screaming and nurses whispered about medical miracles they couldn't explain or understand. Tommy sat cross-legged on his hospital bed, no longer connected to machines, his color healthy pink instead of hypothermic blue. When he saw Sarah through that observation window, he smiled with radiant joy that lit up the whole room. "Mama, I knew you'd come back to me." Robert Clearwater stood blocking the doorway, custody papers in hand like a shield. "Sarah, you can't be here." The court order states clearly, The court order assumes I'm an unfit mother, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying new strength that came from somewhere deep inside. But look at my son. Look at what he chose to do when he thought he was alone. I raised that boy. Me. Whatever else I failed at. I didn't fail at that. Tommy slipped past his uncle like water flowing around a stone. Wrapping his arms around Sarah's waist, his embrace felt different, stronger, more coordinated than it had ever been. Mama, I can walk normal now. The water, it fixed something that was broken inside me. Dr. Martinez emerged from Tommy's room, holding test results that defied medical explanation. The infection is completely gone. His kidney function is normal. And somehow, she paused, checking those papers again. The old polio damage in his leg has reversed itself. I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice. Earl Henderson stepped off the elevator, moving with the careful pace of a man who'd survived 2 heart attacks but refused to act like an invalid. He saw the family reunion and stopped, not wanting to intrude on something sacred. Tommy noticed him immediately. Earl, you're all right. The boy broke away from Sarah, moving with obvious joy toward the man who'd saved his life. Earl knelt, wincing, as Tommy hugged him with 8-year-old enthusiasm that could have cracked ribs. You came back, Tommy said. I was scared you might not wake up. Takes more than a couple of heart attacks to stop an old bull like me, Earl replied, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name or understand. Jake Morrison appeared at the far end of that hallway, moving slowly but under his own power. His throat bore visible scars from the rope, and when he tried to speak, only rasping sounds emerged, like air through broken bellows. But he carried something in his hands, a bundle of handwritten pages covered in cramped writing that had taken him all night to complete. Tommy saw Jake approaching and moved toward him without fear or anger. The boy's lack of resentment hit Jake like a physical blow, making him stagger against the wall. Jake held out those pages, a detailed confession of every crime his gang had committed, every child they'd bullied, every act of vandalism and intimidation they'd perpetrated, names, dates, witnesses, everything that would destroy his plea bargaining position and implicate others in his web of violence. He pointed to his damaged throat, then to the papers, then to Tommy. His meaning was clear as crystal. This was his voice now, speaking truth instead of hatred. Sarah read over that confession, recognizing the legal implications. Jake, this will send you to prison for years. Jake nodded, pointing to Tommy, then to himself, then making a gesture that encompassed the hospital around them. His eyes held no self-pity, only determination to make things right regardless of personal cost. Mrs. Dorothy Wright appeared from the elevator, carrying a small television and a grim expression that spoke of bad news. You folks need to see this. She plugged in that TV, tuning to the morning news. Jennifer Walsh's face filled the screen de costo, but her expression had changed from confident authority to defensive embarrassment. Correction to our earlier report. Video evidence has emerged showing that the incident in Millerville involved a rescue operation, not gang violence. 3 individuals risked their lives to save a child from drowning. The screen cut to security footage from that gas station, grainy black and white images showing Earl diving into the hole, Jake helping with the rescue, Sarah entering the water to assist. The narrative Jennifer Walsh had constructed collapsed in real time like a house of cards. Furthermore, Walsh continued, clearly reading from a prepared statement written by lawyers. This reporter acknowledges that quotes attributed to community members were taken out of context and do not reflect the actual circumstances of the rescue operation. Earl watched the broadcast with quiet satisfaction. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Dr. Martinez approached their unlikely group gathered in that pediatric hallway. Yeah, man, Hyenas, Mr. Henderson, you shouldn't be walking around after cardiac surgery. And Mr. Morrison, you're supposed to be under psychiatric observation. Earl and Jake exchanged looks. Two men who'd found redemption in each other's company despite every reason to remain enemies. Doc, Earl said, sometimes the best medicine isn't what comes in bottles. Social worker Patricia Knox appeared with fresh paperwork, but her demeanor had changed. Instead of bureaucratic authority, she carried the uncertain air of someone whose assumptions had been challenged by reality. Mrs. Clearwater, given the new information about the incident, and your son's remarkable recovery, Knox hesitated. The custody order may need complete reconsideration. Tommy looked up at the adults surrounding him, his mother, his uncle, the disgraced sheriff, the reformed bully, the confused social worker. Are we all going to be all right now? It was a child's question, asked with a child's faith that grown-ups could fix whatever was broken. But looking around at the faces in that hospital hallway, Sarah realized something had already been fixed. Not their legal problems or financial struggles or the community divisions that had created this crisis. Something deeper. The recognition that people could choose to be better than their worst moments. Earl's telephone rang. Deputy Mills's voice carried urgency even through the tinny speaker. Henderson, you need to get down here right away. FBI just raided Mayor Roberts' office. Found evidence of a whole conspiracy to drive native families off their land for development. They want to talk to you about what you witnessed. Earl looked at Tommy, at Sarah, at Jake holding his confession. On my way. As Earl headed toward the elevator, Tommy called after him. Will you come back? After you talk to the FBI folks? Earl stopped, turned back to face the boy whose near death had awakened something dead in his own heart. Son, I'm not going anywhere. We're family now. The elevator doors closed behind Earl, leaving Tommy with his mother and the young man who'd nearly destroyed them both. Jake held out his confession again, pointing to the signature line he hadn't yet signed. But Tommy shook his head, placing his small hand over those papers. He looked up at Jake, and for a moment the damaged 18-year-old saw himself as he might have been, innocent, hopeful, unbroken by anger and shame. Tommy whispered something too quiet for the adults to hear. But Jake's scarred face showed he understood, and tears began streaming down his cheeks like spring rain. What Tommy had said would remain between them forever, but its effect was immediate and profound. Jake Morrison, who had spent years choosing cruelty over kindness, made a different choice. He tore up that confession piece by piece, letting the fragments fall like snow. But as the last piece hit the floor, alarms began sounding throughout the hospital. Not medical emergencies, but security alerts. Through the windows, they could see federal agents swarming the parking lot. Someone had been watching them all along. 1 year later, August 15th, 1988, Tommy Clearwater's bare feet found purchase on smooth river stones. His balance perfect as he crossed Clearwater Creek without the stumble step that had marked his childhood. The water ran clear over granite. Nothing like the contaminated hole that had nearly claimed his life 12 months past. Sarah spread a checkered tablecloth on the grass, her movements economical and sure. The Clearwater Community Health Center uniform she wore carried the stripe of a nurse supervisor, earned through night classes and 14-hour days that somehow felt lighter than her old double shifts at Murphy's Diner. Tommy, help me with this cooler, she called out. Tommy jogged back from the creek, his gait smooth and even as a thoroughbred's. Dr. Martinez had stopped asking how the old polio damage had healed itself. Some questions didn't have medical answers that made sense to learned folks. Earl Henderson emerged from his truck, moving slower than he had before those heart attacks, but without at the defeated shuffle of his drinking days. Margaret walked beside him, her hand resting on his forearm with the comfortable familiarity of people who'd learned to love each other's scars. "Brought fresh corn from the ranch," Earl announced, setting down a bushel basket that smelled of summer sunshine. "Young folks picked it this morning before the dew dried." The Second Chances Ranch housed 15 teenagers now. Boys and girls from broken homes who learned farming, mechanics, and conflict resolution under Earl's patient guidance. His separated shoulder had healed crooked, making his shirt hang uneven, but his eyes held the clarity of a man who'd found his true calling. Jake Morrison's truck pulled up last, engine knocking from too many miles and not enough money for proper repairs. He climbed out, careful-like, throat scars visible above his collar, and retrieved a guitar case from the truck bed. Jake. Tommy ran toward the young man who'd once tried to destroy him. Jake caught the boy in a one-armed hug, his damaged vocal cords producing only a whispered greeting that sounded like wind through autumn leaves. "Brought my guitar," Jake rasped, voice rough as sandpaper, but carrying warmth that hadn't existed in his old speaking voice. "Learned some new songs at the university." The University of Montana had given Jake a scholarship for Native American students studying conflict resolution. He spent weekends here, running youth programs that kept other angry children from following his path toward violence and despair. Mrs. Dorothy Wright arrived in Father McManus's station wagon, both elderly figures moving with the deliberate pace of people who'd outlived their enemies and learned patience. Wright carried a thermos of coffee that would stay hot until sunset. McManus brought his chess set, worn smooth from years of games with Earl. "How's the library expansion coming along?" Sarah asked Wright. "Foundation gets poured next month, computer room, expanded children's section, and a community meeting space?" Wright's voice carried satisfaction that came from watching something grow instead of simply surviving day to day. "Federal grants are wonderful things when the FBI clears your name proper." Dr. Carlos Martinez parked his clinic van beside Jake's truck, medical bag always within reach, even during social gatherings. He'd been courting Sarah for 6 months with the patient persistence of a man who understood that trust grew slowly in hearts that had been broken. Tommy ran to him immediately. "Papa Carlos, come see the dam I built." The title had evolved natural-like, not replacing Tommy's missing father, but creating something new and precious. Martinez followed the boy toward the creek, listening to excited descriptions of engineering projects that showed Tommy's mind working in directions his genetics couldn't have predicted. Chief Robert Crowdog arrived on foot, having walked the 2 miles from the reservation because walking helped him think through problems. He carried a bundle wrapped in traditional cloth, sweetgrass, and sage for the blessing ceremony he performed each year to mark Tommy's survival. "Uncle Robert," Tommy called out, using the honorific he'd learned from his mother's patient teaching about family obligations. "Will you tell the story about grandfather's compass again?" Robert smiled, unwrapping those herbs with ceremony that honored both tradition and the present moment. "After we eat, nephew. Stories go better with full stomachs and grateful hearts." Sarah watched the gathering with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd learned to measure wealth in relationships rather than paychecks. Her house mortgage would take 15 more years to pay off, but she owned something more valuable than property: the knowledge that she'd raised a son worth saving. Earl started a fire in the stone circle he'd built here last spring, each stone carried by hand from that old gas station before they demolished it completely. The flames caught quickly in the dry Montana air, sending smoke spiraling toward clouds that promised rain by evening. Jake tuned his guitar, fingers finding chords despite scars that made complex fingering difficult. He'd learned to play around his limitations, creating music that sounded nothing like what he'd intended, but everything like what he needed to express. Tommy helped Martinez examine creek water samples under a portable microscope. Both of them absorbed in the science of flow patterns and mineral content. The boy's questions came rapid fire, his hunger for knowledge feeding on itself like kindling catching flame. Margaret spread photographs on the picnic table. Pictures from the ranch's summer activities. Teenage faces looked back from those prints, some smiling, some serious, all showing the particular alertness of young people who'd been given second chances and intended to use them well. "This one's going to agricultural college in the fall," Margaret pointed to a gangly boy holding a prize-winning calf. "Full scholarship. Says he wants to come back and teach sustainable farming on the reservation." Sarah studied those photographs, recognizing something in the teenager's expressions, the same determined hope she'd seen in Tommy's eyes during his recovery. Children could heal from almost anything if someone believed they were worth healing. Father McManus and Chief Crow Dog set up the chessboard between them, beginning their weekly game that combined Catholic theology with Native American philosophy in ways that made both men laugh like schoolboys. "Your move, Chief." "Patience. Father, good moves take time to ripen." Earl called everyone to gather around the fire as sunset painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. Tommy sat cross-legged beside Jake, both of them sharing a bag of roasted peanuts with the comfortable ease of old friends. "Year ago tonight," Earl began, his voice carrying the storyteller's rhythm he'd developed during long evenings at the ranch. "A boy fell into a hole, and 3 broken people found out they weren't as broken as they thought." Tommy looked around the circle, his mother, his uncle, Earl and Margaret, Jake with his scarred throat, Mrs. Wright with her weathered hands, all the adults who'd become his unlikely family. "Earl," Tommy said, voice carrying across the firelight, "what do you think would have happened if we never met?" Earl considered the question, watching flames dance against gathering darkness. "We would have stayed lost, I reckon. But sometimes getting lost is how you find your way home." Sarah reached over, ruffled Tommy's dark hair. "And sometimes the best families aren't born. They're rescued." Jake nodded, his damaged voice adding a whispered contribution. "Together we're stronger than apart." Mrs. Wright opened her thermos, pouring coffee that steamed in the cooling air like incense. "Tommy, read us your essay. The one that won the state competition." Tommy pulled a folded paper from his pocket, smoothing it careful-like. In the firelight, he read words that would be preserved in the Wright Memorial Library's permanent collection. "Heroes aren't people who aren't afraid. Heroes are people who choose love when hate is easier. Sometimes the people who save you are the ones who needed saving too. That's what makes us human. We're all broken, but together we're whole." As his voice faded, the only sounds were creek water moving over stones and the soft crackle of burning wood. Stars appeared overhead, navigation points for travelers who'd learned to find true north in each other's company. Tommy's laughter echoed across the water as Earl taught him to skip stones in the fading light, each successful throw sending ripples toward the far bank where new beginnings waited in the darkness. The compass in Tommy's pocket pointed steady and true, but he no longer needed it to find his way home. I've shared Tommy Clearwater's story with you not as a preacher speaking from a pulpit, but as someone who believes we all carry pieces of Earl's shame, Sarah's desperation, and Jake's anger within our own hearts. We've all been that 8-year-old boy, trapped in holes of our own making, waiting for someone brave enough to climb down and help us out. What struck me most wasn't the dramatic rescue or the healing that followed, but those quiet moments around the campfire a year later, How Mrs. Wright poured coffee for the young man who'd once threatened her library. How Earl taught Tommy to skip stones with hands that had once taken bribes. How Jake's scarred throat found new ways to express kindness instead of hatred. Maybe that's what community really means. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of folks willing to choose connection over separation, forgiveness over judgment, hope over cynicism. In rural Montana or downtown anywhere, the human heart faces the same choice. Will we rescue each other? Or will we walk away when trouble comes calling? Tommy's compass pointed true north. Sometimes, so do we. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. The author does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence, child endangerment, or harmful behavior. All characters, events, locations, and circumstances are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. This narrative explores themes of redemption and community healing through fictional scenarios not intended to represent real individuals or situations involving actual communities or tribes.